Dan, thank you so much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm sorry about the slight delay. This is the first time I've ever given a presentation where I haven't been able to load the presentation because all the computers are Macs. It says something about MIT, I guess. So it is a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great pleasure to be here today because I was up to half 2 in the morning willing Barack Obama to win the election, because for me, for the world, it's hugely important that he's won, and I'll attempt to explain why. I'm going to present to you the emerging vision of the ecological age of civilization, and I'm going to do it using a presentation which is the result of a major piece of research that Barack has been doing over the last 2 years. And the Learn It paper that's behind my presentation is available on the ARUP website. So if you want to go and look at the peer-reviewed background to this presentation, it is actually on the ARUP website. So what I'm presenting to you is a peer-reviewed paper which I'm presenting all over the world in the run-up to the Copenhagen Climate Summit at the end of next year. I'm going to talk about how we envisage moving forward, what sort of framework do we use to get ourselves from where we are to where we need to be. I'm going to talk particularly about what that means in the USA and what policies and practices are likely to deliver it. I want to start with just a bit of background. I'm privileged enough to get information all the time now about climate change, and the IPCC have done a recent analysis of the rate of melting of the ice sheets and all the other indicators. And the current view today is that there is now a 50% probability of a 5-degree centigrade rise in Earth temperature by the end of this century. That effectively means that the Earth will not be inhabitable for a very large number of people by the end of this century unless we do something fairly dramatic. So we are talking about facing the end of civilization as we know it, unless we dramatically change the way we live. And so my presentation is to hopefully explain that and to give you some indication of whether it's possible to do that. And essentially the problem is that we're taking non-renewable resources, we're basically taking them through our lifestyles, and then we're chucking away the end products into the air, the water, the soil, and we're destroying this fragile ecosystem that supports our life on the planet. The planet will survive, but whether we do as a species is somewhat debatable. So these are the questions that I tried to answer in the peer-reviewed paper. Can we move towards a more sustainable way of living? What policies and investments are needed, and what is the role of science and technology? And particularly, I'll try and focus on what I think the areas that MIT probably already are focused on, but areas that you may not be focused on. And in posing this question, I'm assuming that the population in 2050, which is my target date, is going to rise to about 9.5 billion. So I'm assuming that there will be 9.5 billion people on the planet. And what I've done is analyse whether it's possible for us to live on the planet with that number of people. In addition to the pollution and destruction of the ecosystem, the other problem is that the population growth means that we are running out of resources. In particularly, 100 years ago, we had about 8 hectares of land to support every person's life on the planet on average. We now only have 2 hectares, and we're living as if this hasn't happened. We're literally living in complete denial that this has happened. And of course now China and India are now aspiring to live the way we live, and they are therefore beginning to consume huge amounts of resources. The way this is measured is in ecological footprint, and China at the moment, with its urbanization, is expanding its ecological footprint at about 3% a year. What that means is every year China has to find 93 million hectares of extra land to support its urbanization process. It doesn't have 93 million hectares in China, so it's in Africa, it's in South America, it's in Australia, finding those resources to do the urbanization. That is unsustainable, and as I'll show you in a minute, the Chinese government recognizes that. But the other curious thing, and now I want to get into briefly into economics, is that on here you can see that in the US, you're living at the amounts of consumption of land of between 10 and 12 hectares per person, about 6 planets worth of resources right now. And the whole world says, oh, well, we just need America to get back to consumer spending again and the world economy is okay. Well, actually, that is a total disaster, because if you get back to spending using non-renewable resources, all you do is tip the world over the edge. That model doesn't work. And we're now at the point, I think, where everyone's started to say, actually, you're right, it doesn't work. We've got to do something different. So essentially, what's been the problem with the world is that the global economy, that is, the consumption of non-renewable resources, is growing and growing and growing and killing the ecosystem, fundamentally, because we've got this open resource use model where we throw the stuff away and pollute the planet and therefore kill the ecosystem. So essentially, we're in a road to nowhere as far as our ability to live on the planet is concerned. So what we've got to do is recognise that the only way we're going to survive is to move to another economic model, which, if you an economist, you know about this, it's moving from neoclassical economics to ecological economics, where essentially the model is where the economy grows to a certain size based on the old GDP model, but you move from using non-renewables to renewables. And if you have a lifestyle where you use renewable resources really, really efficiently, that determines how successful you are. So essentially you then end up with a model where the ecosystem can recover, you're using renewable resources, and then you can live in harmony with the planet. And that's the transition we've got to go through really within 50 years. And this is a complete transformation, and renewables are the key to it. Of course, the other issue is that this dramatic consumption of resources means that in historical terms, we've always managed to find oil. So we've been going up the edge of this graph. And up till now, we've always been at a point on the graph where we've been below the peak, so there's always a peak ahead. And we found more and more oil to keep that peak ahead of us. Well, we're now up here somewhere, so we've passed the peak. And there is absolutely no prospect of us finding enough oil to satisfy India and China's development. So the reason that we've now got these massive fluctuations in oil prices is because we're passing this peak. And oil prices, despite the fact they've gone down now, will go up again, and the trend line will be they'll go up and up, and we'll probably get to $200 a barrel in 5 years, and they'll keep going up because of the demand-supply situation. So again, we have to move away from non-renewables to renewable resources, and there is America's storage of fossil fuels. So of course this is the future, one of the parts of the future, and the US has fantastic resources of sunlight falling particularly in the southwestern area. And you probably know that, I mean, recently PG&E in California placed a single contract for 900 megawatts of concentrated solar power, and that implementation is now happening. That's about half the size of the Hoover Dam in terms of power output. So there is plenty of renewables, there's plenty of sunlight, there's plenty of wind, and of course energy from waste and other things. So there is no doubt the US can move to using a very high proportion of renewables for the power grid. And it's great that Barack Obama has pledged in his election promise that he's going to kickstart the creation of jobs in the US by putting in place a massive investment program in renewable energy. My understanding is around $150 billion of investment over the next 5 years to kickstart the creation of jobs. The other really big problem is food. This is the first time in human history when we're now producing less food per person than we did 3 or 4 years ago, despite the increasing population. So in reality, we're now in a situation where food prices are now going up. And the only reason we've been able to keep up from the Thomas Malthus prediction that we'd never be able to feed people on the planet, we've been able to do it simply by using fossil fuels to create fertilizers. So all we've done is say, we've got mineral depletion in the soil, but we put so much fertilizer in, you can still grow food. Well, that sort of, we come to the end of that idea. And so now we've got two problems. One is that food production is dependent on fossil fuels, and therefore the price increase is affecting food. But secondly, we no longer can increase food production enough to keep up with population growth. So we've got to find